There are 168 hours in a week. We go to church for 1 hour. What about the other 167?
Cue this podcast. We're here to bring the church to you the rest of the week. I'm David Vogel, the Director of Communication here at Central Community Church.
I'm Corey Brodel, the Director of Community. We've been to the 1 hour in church. Now welcome to the other 167.
We are here today with Mary Kay Vaughn for this episode of 167, but I'm going to pause right there and just kind of address the elephant in the Zoom call, because we're not
Zoom
really...
room.
Yes, the Zoom room. We're doing this one for the first time by Zoom. We're taking some COVID precautions. So Corey and I are here in the studio. Mary Kay is up in the skybox here at the church all by her lonesome, and we're gonna do this podcast a new way.
So Mary Kay, let's just talk about this month, or the last 9 months in COVID. There's been a lot of people, because of it, have lost their jobs. And so they're unemployed. And so today we're going to talk about unemployment with you, and you have your own personal testimony with it. So let's just start there. Why don't you tell us your story?
Sounds good. Well, absolutely. This has been a difficult year for a lot of people, and I, in many ways, identified with them because of my experience. A number of years ago when I lived in Dallas, it was about 2002, I was living there. I was living a life. You know, Dallas is a cool place to live, and I had a cool job, and everything was good until I got called in and was told that I needed to resign my job. I was not given any reason. I was not given any preparation. It was effective, by the end of that day. And it just broke my heart. It broke my spirit. It broke everything. And I never, to this day, I don't know what it was all about except politics. But I'm not going to go there because that's part of the point of this, is that regardless of how you got where you are, you're there. And it doesn't really do a lot of good to, try to figure out how you got there. Otherwise, the biggest why is that God allowed it for some purpose. And that's what I learned in the 15 months that I was without a job living in Dallas. It was a pretty tough time, but it was also amazing. God did things that I'd only read about before, but he did those things for me. And I'm just one of his kids. I didn't have a lot of savings. In fact, I had practically none. And I had about $4,000 a month in bills that, was no problem as long as I was making over $100,000 a year. But when I went down to making unemployment, that seemed like a pretty big mountain. And it was a big mountain, but praise the Lord, thank you, Jesus. God came through in so many ways. I mean, we've all heard the stories, or perhaps you've heard stories about people who were down to their last whatever, and bills were due the next day. Like in my case, it was rent. And I didn't have enough money in the bank to pay my rent the next day. Until someone came to my house that night with a check.
Wow.
I mean, the night before, it's like, how does that happen? And those kinds of stories just went on and on and on. And so I started journaling that, because to me it helped me kind of put things in perspective, because as I would write about something that I was feeling that was sad, it also forced me to bring God into the picture, and that changed my perspective. So I spent, as I said, 15 months without a job. I did a lot of volunteer work at my church down there. I was able to interact with people that, when I was working, I didn't quite have enough time for them, and I'm ashamed to say it, but that was the reality. And so there were a lot of blessings in that experience. And so as I was coming out of it, and in fact it was a job in Wichita that brought me out of it, I thought, there's some painful places in this experience of mine, but because I came through and because God showed up in so many ways, my story might just help someone else. And so I decided to publish all of my journaling. And Sherry Clark here at the church read my little book, and as they were thinking about starting an unemployment ministry or a ministry to the unemployed, she called on me to see if I'd be willing to share my experience, which hopefully is an experience of hope with people who are without work as a result of the pandemic or whatever reason. And so again, I felt God telling me, okay, you've already stepped out there. People know your story. It's in writing, so yes, you can go up in person and share again. And so that's what I'm doing. We've been doing this for 3 weeks now, I think. And while the group is small, it's really, I believe, it's touching them in ways that perhaps they would not be touched otherwise. Because losing a job it's hard. I mean, I don't know if anyone listening or watching this has ever been there, but it is hard. I mean, when you go places and people say, "What do you do?" Well, my answer was look for a job. That's what I do, because I don't have one, and I'm not happy about it. But that's part of your identity, and it hurts. You're angry. You're ashamed, you're down on yourself, and none of that helps. None of that helps, and none of that is of God. And so it was just important to me to be able to share what I can, so that people who are going through all those emotions, and I know they're out there, that they'll see that there is hope.
Can you kind of go into detail about what those emotions are?
Sure. Go ahead.
No, I was going to say, I think if you're going through that, it's helpful to know that maybe you're not alone in that feeling. You're not the only one who's getting that.
Okay, absolutely. Well, anger was the first one that I had. And again, it was because I knew I hadn't done anything wrong. And no one would give me an explanation. And again, while I believe it was politics, that didn't make me feel any better, because people who know me and know my work ethic know that I will work my fingers to the bone, to accomplish whatever the purpose is. And so I was angry. I felt betrayed because people that I had worked alongside, my superiors, my peers, they all just kind of, kicked me to the curb, and that betrayal is a hard emotion. I had some hope initially, because I said, well, no problem, I've got this degree in that one, and this experience in that one, and I know this person in that one. I'll have a job in a month. Well, that didn't happen, and so I started losing hope. And that's another, I think, emotion that anybody who's unemployed is going to have. It's like, what am I going to do? This is not turning out the way I wanted it to. Financially, I had no idea how I was going to pay rent, make my car note. I wasn't as much worried about food, because I could, afford to lose a few pounds. but there were bills that I had to pay, and I have a strong sense of obligation. If I owe something, I want to take care of it. And so I was kind of helpless in that sense. It's like, how in the world am I going to get through without having a job? Again, I didn't struggle too much with the identity thing, except one time. I remember I went to lunch. I was treating myself to lunch like I could afford that. But anyway, and where I lived in Dallas was not far from a cheesecake factory. So I remember I walked in the cheesecake factory at lunchtime, and all these people in there had lanyards with their work name tags. And I didn't have one. I mean, and I remember that forever. That feeling of, I'm nothing. You know, this person's a nurse and that person's a receptionist, and I was nothing. Whew. That was a hard, hard day. And I promised myself never to go out to lunch at lunchtime again, ever. But those are some of the emotions that I went through. And I know that with the pandemic, those emotions are there and probably multiplied, because on top of all of that is this virus, this thing that nobody has been able to control to this point. But praise God, and we're all hopeful. But at this point, so even if there was a job out there, nobody's going to hire you because nobody's hiring anybody because businesses are closed down. I mean, there's even less hope, I think, for people suffering unemployment in the pandemic than for me, because I had all kinds of jobs that I could apply for, and I did. But that loss of hope is like, when is this going to end? For me, again, I thought I was going to have a job in a month. Well, it was, I was off by 14. But God came through every time, and that's the message. This pandemic isn't something that God doesn't have control over. I mean, we don't know how it's going to end, but He knows, and He doesn't. We don't need to know how. We need to know Him.
So one of the things, Mary Kay, that you talked about was the blessings that God gave you during that time. Like you talk about the day your rent was due, that check showing up on your doorstep. And then you've told David and I, one of those blessings is you had a person to go through this with.
Absolutely.
You share that?
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. There was a young woman who worked for the city. This was the city of Dallas that I was working for. And she lost her job also in much the same way that I lost mine. And so we shared notes, we fussed together, we cried together, we prayed together. And it really helped to have someone who could identify with what I was going through. I had friends that cared about me and prayed for me and tried to help, but if you haven't been there, there's just a little something that there's a little something missing. And so she and I, we had a lot of fun together too. We applied for jobs together. I mean, not the same job, but we'd go to job fairs. But one night we went to a church service, and the minister there was preaching a sermon about chocolate chip cookies. He had our attention, right? But the gist of the sermon was, to make chocolate chip cookies, you have to have flour, and you have to have sugar, and you have to have butter, and you have to have chocolate chips, and whatever else you put in it. And then you mix all that stuff up, and then what you have is cookie dough, which, if it has raw eggs in it, you don't want to eat, right? So, but to get to the cookie part, you have to put that dough on a cookie sheet and put it in a hot oven. And so that process of heat brings out the best of all of those ingredients. And so the point of the sermon was, sometimes we're in the oven, sometimes we're feeling heat, we're feeling pressure, but we believe that God allows that so that we'll come out of the oven. And by the way, a good cook doesn't let the cookies stay too long. So, and God is a good cook. And so He doesn't let us stay in that hot oven too long. And when we come out exactly the way He wanted us to be, and a way that we would not have been had we not gone through the pressure of that oven. And so she and I really hung on to that message, and she got a job first. And so we had decided, we made a pact that whoever got their job, or when one of us got a job, we were going to celebrate with cookies. And so when she got her job, we arranged to meet for lunch, and I brought a batch of my favorite recipe chocolate chip cookies, and she brought a batch of hers, and we exchanged, and that's kind of how we we sealed the deal. But it was, and just I went into that detail because it's so important to have somebody that that you can relate to, and if I can be that person for whoever is unemployed and wanting to participate in this ministry, then I'm happy to do it.
Yeah, and I'm really excited for this support group because of that. And so I kind of interviewed you and wrote an article about this for our church magazine. And I think my favorite quote that you gave was, "I'm no more special than anybody else. God did it for me and he can do it for you." And I think that's just a great message to share with everybody who's going through this right now.
Absolutely. And I believe that with my whole heart. God did some things for me that and he showed me some sides of him that I would not have seen had I not gone through this. But he'll do that for anybody else. I mean, he's done it for other people. I just happen to be sharing my story right now, but I really want people to be encouraged. Losing a job is a big deal, but it's not the end of the world. And as long as you hang in there, do the things that you can do, but also let God do the things that he does. Don't get in his way. Don't take over. Don't spend time trying to figure out why. Spend time trying to figure out how God is going to lead you through it.
Let's give a little bit more details on that support group. So you guys are meeting Tuesday at 1 o'clock.
Right.
Here at Central Community Church.
Exactly. We chose 1 o'clock because when I went through my unemployment experience, sometimes during the day, my job was looking for a job. But sometimes I wanted a break in that, like the day I went to lunch. But of course, I'm not going to do that break again. But anyway, so we picked 1 o'clock, thinking that might be a good time that people who were in the job market or looking for work just might want a break, want to take a breather. And so we're here at the church from 1 to 2. It's just 1 hour, and I have material prepared, but if a person, if the discussion goes in another direction, that's good, as long as God's in the center of it. And so
how can they register? David, is that on the centralcommunity.church/register or email Pastor Sher?
It's on the my.centralcommunity.church. Go to the studies classes, and there's information there.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Mary Kay, for sharing your story and leading this new ministry that's so needed right now in our community. So thank you for being here today.
It's my pleasure to do what I can to lift somebody else.
Thanks for listening to 167. Please leave us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, or wherever you're listening from.
And to keep up with everything at Central Community Church, follow us on Facebook and Instagram. And if you want to watch us record this podcast live, find us on YouTube.
We think the 167 hours between church services are so important, and we hope you'll share this episode with your friends. Join us next week.